Call to order the regular meeting of the Berkeley Planning Commission. Today is Tuesday, January 22nd. Can everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, Mr. McLean, could you please take the roll?
Yes. Buckler.
Here.
Kempner.
Here.
Murad.
Here.
Patterson.
Here.
Richardson.
Here.
Shadle.
Here.
Smith.
Here.
Trotto.
Here.
Kapelansky.
Here. All right, thank you. Next up on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Does anyone have any changes or a motion to approve?
One item to add, Madam Chair. Under communications, we received some correspondence from former Planning Commissioner Dave Barnett about the proposed design overlay district.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Any other comments, changes, or motion to approve?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Okay.
I'll second.
Mr. McLean, could you please take the roll?
Buckler.
Here? Yes, sorry, yes.
Kempner.
Yes.
Murad.
Yes.
Patterson.
Yes.
Richardson.
Yes.
Shadle.
Yes.
Smith.
Yes.
Trotto.
Yes.
Kapelansky.
Yes. Okay, next up was communications. Mr. McLean already mentioned the letter we got from former Commissioner Barnett. So we have that. I didn't see anything else. There was nothing else to add, correct? Okay. Oh, thank you. Approval of the minutes. So the December 11th Planning Commission meeting minutes, any changes? Any motions?
Motion to approve.
Okay.
Second.
Mr. McLean?
Kempner.
Yes.
Murad.
Yes.
Patterson.
Yes.
Richardson.
Yes.
Shadle.
Yes.
Smith.
Yep.
Trotto.
Yes.
Buckler.
Yes.
Kapelansky.
Yes. All right, next up is citizen comment. If there's anyone in the audience that would like to comment on an item not on the agenda, this would be the time to step forward. We'd ask that you sign in on the sheet provided by Mr. McLean. And as a reminder, the Planning Commission will not engage you in a discussion. When you come to the microphone, please state your name and address and keep your comments to 4 minutes or less. Is there anyone who would like to comment on an item not on the agenda this evening?
Sign in.
But I know.
Okay. Annalise Petras. I live on Franklin and Berkeley. I found that the agenda packet had a lot more material than I was expecting. So I'm requesting that the ordinance amendment and all of its attachments be discussed before the public hearing so that my public hearing isn't just a bunch of questions. So.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Okay, then we'll move on to the first item on our agenda, which is a site plan review for Jenna and White. This is PSP 0418, located at 2685 Coolidge Highway. Could the applicant please step forward?
Good evening, members of the Planning Commission. My name is John Sarkeesian. I'm with John Sarkeesian Architects, and we're the architects that are designing the second floor addition and the rear addition to Jenna and White. And this is the owner.
Hi, I'm co-owner, Mal Zatori, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. I'm co-owner with my wife, Jenna. The business has been thriving. It's actually bringing a lot of people into Berkeley, which is great. And we have like videos, online videos are getting like hundreds of thousands of views. So showing people what Berkeley is, so it's pretty great. I'm actually recently involved with the Chamber of Commerce as well to for the event, the street fair event that they're doing. So we're trying to like bolster things up. So I think this is an effort to bolster things up as well. So things are growing, which I really love. So thank you. So I'll let John explain.
So the business is a bridal salon. They have 2 areas for fitting and I guess that's the right term, fitting. And they can see 2 clients at a time, and so their business is busy enough that they needed to expand. So we're adding a 2nd floor to add 2 more fitting areas, so they'll be able to see 4 clients at a time. Is that correct?
Plus the architectural value, because the architectural value of the building increases the look of the area. It's just gonna look nice. So.
So we're adding a 2nd floor and a stairwell and elevator and lobby in the back, and the building is the new addition will follow the same feel of the building, but it's a little bit more contemporary, a little more edgy. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask. I brought material samples as well. Tim asked if we could. So.
Great. Mr. McLean, did you have anything to add to that?
Not much. The size of the existing building is 783 square feet. The proposed addition, if approved, would more than double the building in size. It would go up to 1,847 square feet. As the applicant has indicated, they would be adding on to the back of the 1st floor, and they would be constructing a brand-new 2nd floor.
Okay. All right, thank you. Is there anyone from the audience who would like to comment on this matter? No? Okay. So with that, I will open it up for Planning Commission discussion. Who would like to start?
Madam Chair,
Yes, Ms. Shado.
maybe we can see the samples and you can tell us exactly where each is going.
So the original building has black granite in front, and the sides is the old original building that's CMU or concrete masonry units painted gloss black. The areas that we're adding are a combination of gloss black painted CMU in the back and corrugated metal for the upper level, as well as in front we're adding some additional granite to match the front black granite and an accent sort of a vertical element that turns horizontal that's going to be like a brushed aluminum. So the corrugated metal will be it'll be a vertical corrugated metal. I believe you have elevations to reference? Okay. So it'll be a vertical corrugated metal. We haven't chosen the exact profile, but it'll be something like this, not these colors, or something like this, and it'll be in a charcoal gray color. This is a metal sample, but just to show you the look of the charcoal gray and the black together. We've got a picture to pass around that's sort of was the inspiration for the color scheme, and it shows a charcoal gray corrugated metal with black window frames. If you'd like to see that, pass that around. And then the element that sort of frames the front facade will be a brushed aluminum element that goes vertically and then horizontally. So. Yeah, the second floor display window will be butt glazed, so the glass will not have like any frames. Again, was trying to make it a little bit more contemporary than the original part of the store. And there will be like a box bay on the south east corner of the building, where there'll be like a dedicated nice dress display in the window. So, up on the second floor.
Okay, thank you. Anything else, Ms. Shado, right now? Okay.
Kristen?
Yes.
I haven't seen any site photometrics. Is there any new lighting being put on the outside? Any?
As of right now, we have not proposed any new lighting. If we do, we will get photometrics and present it to you. But as of right now, we weren't planning on adding any other lighting, not any parking lot lighting. There's a little back entrance that, a little back porch that'll probably have a light underneath it, for security and whatnot, but not any kind of additional lighting for the parking.
I had an interesting thought to throw out maybe for the discussion of the commission. The parking lot layout seemed a little bit awkward, particularly with this space labeled number 3. I can imagine some people maybe who aren't as great at parallel parking hitting the car in space number 4 when they're trying to get into that space. So going through the ordinance, I saw that if you could install 4 bike parking spaces, you can eliminate 2 car parking spaces. So I'm just kind of throwing out for discussion the elimination of spaces 3 and 1 and 4 bike parking spaces installed in place of space number 1. It's my understanding that would still be in compliance with the ordinance, and I'm very concerned about car number 3 hitting car number 4.
I think for his purposes, I don't think, when people are trying wedding dresses on, it probably would be conducive to showing up on a bike. So for his customers, I think it would be better to keep the spaces, and we could add a curb between the 2 spaces.
Yeah, that would be an option. I personally think there's a huge lack of bike parking spaces on Coolidge. I know that your customers probably aren't going to use the bike parking, but the street parking is available as well. But if it's the choice of the commission that they would rather see those spaces kept, then that's fine if that's the opinion of the majority. I'm just throwing it out there as a suggestion. I was concerned about spaces 3 and 4.
The other thing that we can do too is space 5 is about a couple feet off the lot line, and we could always move it over a little bit and not only make it a curb, but actually like a little green space or something. So
yeah, it might be
between
something.
Then there'd be like a little green space between 4 and 3.
Yep, it might be something to think about. I understand that you want to have the parking available, but personally, I never have a problem finding a space on the street on Coolidge, right in front of where I want to go. So it's just a thought. Yes, Ms. Berkley?
I think though the only challenge would be is typically it's not a single person going to the bridal shop as
That's true.
as a like dozen-time bridesmaid. It was always a gaggle of us showing up, so there's like 5 or 6 cars that are going to have to, on top of parking in front. So it might be good to have the extra spaces, but it'd be nice if we had a place for bikes. This just might not be it.
My other concern is our parking spaces are generally 9 feet wide, but when they're next to a wall, you have to add a foot. So those parking spaces should be 10 feet wide.
We could do that because we have 19'6" total, so we'd be able to do that.
Mr. Smith?
Mr. Chairman, in our ordinance, the drive for parallel parking isn't defined, the width of the drive. It does say 9 foot wide. It says 9-inch wide space, but it's probably meant to be 9 foot wide. We're between 2 walls here. That's pretty dang tight.
It is.
But I agree, for the sake of their building. Do people park there now?
Yes.
Okay. You haven't had any issues with, protecting your wall? Is that a gas meter out in front?
Yes, there's one right at the front of the building towards the road.
That's a gas meter? Okay. Okay.
But it has a fence around.
Right. Because I see a lot of things happening here. We're real narrow, and Ms. Kempner is absolutely right. They should be 10 feet wide, the spaces, but that takes our drive down to 10 feet. It's a tight spot, and like I said, walls on both sides. We also have, like we mentioned, there's a gas meter there. Apparently it hasn't been hit yet. They're also adding a little a triple post on some kind of a base. I just see some things here that could easily be damaged by an overexcited bride or bridesmaid.
Or my
Or
mom,
mother-in-law.
just generally
Yeah, or
parking.
mother-in-law.
Or a groom for a tux fitting.
I won't say anything about parallel parking there. But anyway, so there's a lot of potential, and if nothing's happened, okay, fine. But I see a lot of potential for things. But the site is what it is. You know, we can't create space.
It's been functioning that way. You know, one thing we were just talking about, I think the way they park now is the cars park on the south side of the lot, and the circulation is against Jenna's building. So we could, if we push the spaces all the way to the back of the lot, that would give us enough room to get around the gas meter, and then the circulation would be between, and then that would also separate space 3 and 4.
Yeah.
So we could do that. That'd be,
You really don't need that space to the west beyond space 3. that
correct
marking.
Yeah.
You could push space 3 down, even with 4 and 5, and spread them out. 1 and 2, spread them out.
Right.
They don't really comply with our what the diagram shows in our ordinance, but by spreading those out, it will very easily comply.
Yeah.
With the length of a space. Now, there's a curious phrase in here. It says barrier, I assume it's barrier-free parking, to utilize municipal parking space. Where is that?
There's spaces right in front of the building.
Those aren't barrier-free spaces. On Coolidge?
Yeah.
Those aren't barrier-free spaces.
Well,
There's one in front of the disabled veterans that's marked. It's right next to, it's just up the street.
It's just up the street?
Yeah,
Okay. How far away is it? About?
Gosh, I guess, I mean, it sits right in front of that disabled veterans building, so half a block, quarter of a block.
Okay.
That's right to the north of,
I would like, if in,
Buildings, maybe.
yeah, you know, the spirit of the civil rights ADA laws, which is the Fed, is that when parking is redeveloped, you take as close as possible to provide a barrier-free space. I don't know if this complies with the spirit of the law. We talked about this in my office today, several of us, and we're not sure it does. I will leave it up to the building department to determine that. But when we make a motion, I would like that to be a motion. But it is unfortunately our law. Not unfortunately, but it is our law. So we have to make sure that a barrier-free space, an accessible space, is provided in the spirit of the rules. Okay, that's the parking. Yeah, as I,
There. Probably disabled enough.
what's your approach to this rear entry? Is it a side approach, a front approach? Just make sure you get some dimensions in there for the building department to show that you have the proper clearance.
yeah, the ADA
Clearance,
right.
right.
I think it's close enough.
Yeah, it would be straight in.
There's
And
latch side clearances and all that.
yeah, we have the clearances for the hinge side, the latch side.
Will that be a zero, that sidewalk underneath that porch? Is that
That's just really showing the material change on
Yeah.
on the plan.
Okay.
Yeah. Does it add that.
What happens when a car parks in front of it? How do they get in?
Well, that's actually going to be solved by moving everything to the south, moving the parking to the south side. Yeah, very good point, yeah.
Okay. Just try to coordinate all that.
We assumed that, you know, when a car was there, people would approach the building directly from the west, you know, because there's a clear path.
Okay,
But it basically, you know, resolves it from either direction once we move the parking to the south side of the lot.
Okay. Single-user elevator, you got a barrier-free toilet upstairs. The elevations, you showed the materials here. How high is that overhang on the southeast corner?
That overhang is approximately, it's above 9 feet. I don't have a scale with me right
Not worried
here.
about a truck smacking that?
No, because there's a gas meter underneath it.
Yeah, okay.
So you can't really,
It's well placed.
you know,
If
and
you're
it
gonna
has
do that's
bollards
the place
around
to
it and
put
everything, so, yeah.
Okay,
That was one of the reasons why we put the circulation on the other side.
understood.
But I think by pushing the 3 spaces all the way to the west, we'll be able to get around all that, so.
There's no elevation on the north wall. You're building up a floor from building to the north. What's the
Yeah,
finish
it's
of that?
butting against the other building for the most part, and then the remaining part would be CMU painted to match the rest of the addition
Okay.
and the existing building.
Okay. Now, here's a problem I've had in the past. You're building a taller building, a structure next to a shorter structure. How do you know that your snowdrift loads on the adjacent structure? This is not our business. I'm just bringing these things up.
Well, that is something that we're all aware of as architects, and we do use structural engineering consultants, so we do plan to address that and
It's a tough
study
one.
that we won't be creating a problem for the neighbor.
Right.
You know, I mean, all that we can do is if we give them some analysis about how they might have to increase, I mean, I don't believe that it would be their responsibility to increase the structure, but we could give the analysis for them to do so, for the recommendation.
This is an issue we have in our office all the time.
Yeah,
And a
it
lot of
is.
times, and I'm not saying you have a hostile neighbor, but if there's a hostile neighbor, you know, you can't even look at my building, much less get on it. And I don't know how to do it.
So I actually talk to Matt all the time. He's my friend.
That's
and,
fine.
And I need to bring this up to him, actually.
Okay, I'm just
but
bringing it up.
He was asking me, actually, he said he has a brand-new roof, and he was asking about protecting the roof while we're building up.
Yeah, don't drop
Covering-
any concrete
Yeah,
blocks
we're
off the
covering it
roof.
up, yeah. But that's another issue that I need to mention to
Yeah.
him, actually.
It's just,
That would be, the protecting the roof would be more of a means and methods kind of thing in the
Yeah.
construction process,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it would definitely be a part of it. Obviously, he doesn't want to alienate his neighbor that he's already
Right.
has a great relationship with, so.
He's my friend.
and the only, like I said, the only reason I bring it up, it is an issue
Oh, yeah,
everywhere.
it is. We're aware of it whenever we design a building with multiple levels that you always, you know, the
Infill or
downs.
adding, yeah,
Right.
okay.
So-
Just, if you thought about it, you know, it's up to the building department especially too, but it's just, that's something that needs to be thought about, so, okay. Ms. Chairman, I don't know if I have any more questions.
Okay,
Mr. Chairman?
yes.
So I'm looking at this now and kind of sketching at this and seeing that if you move the parking to the south side of the lot, the 2 spaces in the back then could potentially become angle parking so that people don't have to maneuver around, pull in forward out of the alley.
Oh, the 2 in the back, I see what you're saying.
You
The
could
2
protect-
behind the building.
Behind the building, yeah, they could become angle parking potentially, and
Mm-hmm. Yeah, possibly we could do that, yeah.
what do you think, Marty?
We'll study
Will
that.
work?
I don't know if it fits. but go.
Yeah, study it. I mean, absolutely study it. Is there a need of a dumpster?
No, we just have a trash bin, and
Okay.
it's sufficient.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
and where do you put that out?
It's in the corner. It's in the corner
It's
right
back
now.
in this corner right
Yeah,
here.
but between, how do I explain where that is?
So it would be in the northwest corner of the existing building,
Does that help?
outside.
You can see it on Google Earth.
You can see it? You can see the dumpster?
Your little
Okay.
trash bin.
All right, so the garbage trucks drive down the alleyway and pick it up? from
Yeah.
there. Okay, perfect. Yeah, because if you did the angle parking, you'd have that little corner right behind the addition that you could put it in then. If that works.
So under construction.
Would you put the spaces like this?
Anything that works. Much better.
Yeah, so you might be able to do something like that.
Other than that, I don't have any other questions. They've already been addressed.
Okay, anyone else? anyone want to make a motion?
Ms. Chairman, I could make a motion. I have to find it. Excuse me. There's nothing else anybody wants to discuss? I was busy writing. I wasn't paying attention. So.
No, I think
Okay.
everyone said they were good.
I would make a motion to approve site plan PSP-04-18 with the following. I think it's our due diligence to ask them to verify that there is an accessible parking space within the within the spirit or the law, the ADA laws. And I would also like them to adjust the parking layout, maybe move some things around. 5's probably enough. How many do you have right now?
I didn't count them.
Well, it's probably only 5 or 6.
Do you know how many there are?
Existing, it's not striped, and so at different times of the day, there's, I mean,
Depends where people are. Okay.
Yeah.
But I would ask to, take a look at the parking, see if you can come up with something that works a little better. It's not a major thing, it's just minor. So those are the 2 conditions I have, and that can be just sent back to the administration or the building department. I don't think we have to see that again. We threw out a bunch of ideas, and I believe you've been receptive to looking at
great feedback, I appreciate it.
Yeah. I'm glad your business is thriving. I think those are the only 2. I think those are the 2 comments I have.
Okay.
I'll support that.
Any discussion on the motion?
And that includes making sure that they're the correct width, right?
Yes. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else? No? Mr. McLean, could you please call the roll?
Murad,
Yes.
Patterson,
Yes.
Richardson,
Yes.
Shadle,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
Trotto,
Yes.
Buckler,
Yes.
Kempner,
Yes.
Kaplansky.
Yes. All right, thank you, gentlemen. If you could just work with
Thank you
staff
for your time.
to get those items cleaned up. Okay, next up, we have the Design Overlay District Ordinance. Mr. McLean, could you please introduce the topic for us?
Yes, Director Carmody has made some additional changes to the proposed ordinance language for the Design Overlay District. Specific changes were made based on comments from planning commissioners at the last meeting, and I believe she is here this evening to answer any questions regarding those changes.
Ms. Carmody, did you have anything to add?
Yes, so one of the things we talked about at the last Planning Commission meeting was reaching out to our liaison from the Redevelopment Ready community, Elizabeth King, and I did speak to her extensively. And she's the one who I talked to her about whether or not other communities, RRC communities, are using kind of a square footage allotment to determine distinction between administrative and design review board, PC, and she said yes, they're actually seeing that quite a bit, which is what we went out to do then, is kind of review what some other communities are doing, and that's how we came up with what recommendation we've put into this ordinance. The other thing is, she said that she was very pleased that we were moving forward with these design guidelines in the Design Overlay District and the Design Review Board, because at our RRC they see this as a means of making the process move much more quickly and easily for developers and business owners who are looking to improve or to create new development within the city. So that was very positive feedback, and that's what we've got.
Okay,
So
thank you. Okay, this is a public hearing, so what I'd like to do is take public comment at this time. I know we had a request for an opportunity for additional comment as part of the discussion. I think we've had a chance to kind of look this over, several meetings now. It hasn't changed all that drastically from this last time. So I'd like to do the comment now with the realization that this would be a recommendation to council should it proceed this evening, and there would be an additional opportunity for comment at the council meeting as well. So I will go ahead and open the public hearing. Mr. Terrell, do you want to start things off?
Thank you. Charles Terrell on Columbia and Berkeley. I think that they're being intellectually dishonest in this proposal. They're not calling things what they really are. They're not design guidelines, they're design mandates. It's not an advisory review board, it's a regulatory board. Be honest and call them what they really are. Giving the administrative approval to the DDA director and the development director, I think, is problematic. We've had issues before with administratively approved projects that have gone haywire. Council met earlier today, met with the lawyers to talk about one of those that went sideways. This proposal will take work away from this council, away from the zoning. You won't be seeing all these things coming across. My calculations, my reading of things, Green Lantern could be administratively approved under these proposals. So they wouldn't have come to the zoning board, was it last week or 2 weeks ago, whenever it went to zoning. And it would not come here to this board either. So I think that's very problematic. Now knowing the genesis of the what other communities are doing, it's a little more palatable. Basically, my feeling on that is, hey, Mom, look, all these other communities are letting us do this, are letting their building departments do this. Why can't we do that too? Whenever I always did that, my mom would say, yeah, and then are you going to go, if they do go jump off a bridge, are you going to jump off a bridge too? Just because other communities are doing things similarly doesn't mean we need to do that as well. And I have heard from the very beginning of all of this that things will move along more quickly. It'll be easier for developers. Only those that we're not going to have to go to zoning and planning anymore will be easier. Those that still need to come to the zoning board or still need to come to the planning commission, this is adding extra steps along the way. The DDA director and the development director will have to approve it. The regulatory board, the design regulatory board will have to approve it. Then it can come to planning commission, then it can come to zoning. So I don't see how, other than for those that are administratively approved, how it's going to happen more quickly, how it's going to be better for developers, how it's going to be better for anyone. That being said, I ask and urge you to vote to deny this overlay district tonight.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
Annalise Petrus, I live on Franklin and Berkeley. So I guess what I find very disconcerting about this, while I endorse the idea of having a downtown district, having guidelines, I think that the guidelines serving a purpose of review, this guidelines document lacks specificity, and that because of that, there will be inconsistent results. And so then, how are you really making an identity if you don't establish some thresholds? Like take the blade signs, for example. The guidelines encourages that, but it doesn't say whether they'd be lighted or not lighted or stick out, 3 feet or 10 feet. Like, there's a whole bunch of things that the guidelines are vague about. And so if one business might start and do one thing, and then another business does something else, well, did it really achieve the results? I feel like the proper path is to do the hard work, amend the zoning code to have these things in specific ways. That if you have a sign in the downtown district, it has these rules, and the rules are this. That I would ask ourselves, if the zoning ordinance was up to date at the moment, would you still want this design review board? To me, it seems like the guidelines is trying to skirt the issue of the town's master plan and the ordinance being out of date with the community's wishes. So I don't see how it, intercommittee is working. Having administrative items off to the side, I think, is problematic, especially for the downtown district. If that's your showpiece, that's the one you want the most rules applied to. Adding a beer cooler, well, in some places may seem incidental. I think if you did that at this corner right here at 12 and Coolidge and you added a beer cooler, I'd want the Planning Commission reviewing that. I don't care if it's 50 square feet or 750 square feet. I want to know what kind of brick, does it match the building, did they use metal? Like, that's the kind of stuff that is not administratively a method. Having a 750 square foot threshold, to me, is very high. Even within the building code, if you're over 735 square feet, you now have 2 doors for means of egress. Everything is very strict about areas. I think that this threshold is way too high, even if you did have the administrative. I also am concerned that the Overlay District Review Board doesn't state that it would have participated in the Open Meetings Act. It doesn't have that the meetings would be advertised for notice or notice to people within 500 feet of the site. That's true for Planning Commission, but what about the review board? Are you going to let the neighbors know when that meeting happens that they could participate? I'm not in support of this ordinance revision. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
How's it going? Kurt Height, Berkley. Echoing what these two have said before me, and I'm not disagreeing with anything they say. I support everything they said, and I also want to, support what former chairperson Barnett had wrote in. Basically, I feel that the review board, to me, I think is an unnecessary step, and I think it could add an extra layer, and it just complicates things. And I do agree that the 750 square feet, to me, there's a threshold that I get concerned that there's going to be a lot of things that are going to be allowed to just pass, just because people say, that another board says, you know what, it fits within whatever threshold. And I worry because when you look at, somebody already brought up Vincetta, and then you consider some things that have been done administratively recently, whether it's Tallulah's, whether it's the hair salon, whether it's the bank. There were things that really should have come before you guys, but somehow, however the calculations, and even the Green Lantern, I feel should have come before you guys first to look at things. Most importantly, the parking lot, because of how it was, some of the spaces were done. And I just feel that administratively, there's a lot of leeway being taken, and I just worry that they're getting so much more power to do things that I feel that you guys do a really good job of, if there's so many of you guys looking at the codes, that the other boards aren't necessarily, you know, their expertise is not that. That's not what they're there for. They're more looking to promote businesses, to make, you know, to get a better business, but not necessarily how it might disrupt other things that it's supposed to work with. So I mean, I'm not in support of this. I am in support of the idea of adopting it into our zoning ordinances and our codes, and having it a part of that where you guys can work with it. But, you know, because some of the guidelines do look nice. The administration part, you know, that worries me. So I would hope that you guys vote no. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else that would like to comment? No? Besides the communication from Mr. Barnett, we had no other additional comments that we received via email or letter or anything like that, correct, Mr. McLean?
None at this time.
Okay, with that, I will close the public hearing then. And we'll move on to the discussion. I think we start with the downtown design overlay section itself and maybe move on from there. Who would like to start?
Can I just start with a quick question?
Yes, Mr. Richardson.
Has the city attorney reviewed the language that's in front of us?
Yes.
Okay. And he had no problem with it or objection to it, is that correct?
The only edit he suggested was if you go to administrative review under 2, where it's not even, it talks about the during administrative review, and this isn't even part of the design review, but this was his suggestion, that instead of saying the building official, and I think it says city planner, he said you should change it to community development director. That was the edit he suggested out of those 3 ordinances.
Thanks.
Ms. Carmody, while you're up there, could I throw out one additional question? So several of the public comments had to deal with why we are going this route as opposed to going through the ordinance piece by piece. Do you have any comment on why it might be beneficial to allow some flexibility in interpreting and implementing the design guidelines? Or I'm seeing that as one of the reasons we're going this route as opposed to going through the ordinance and amending each section. But did you have any comment on that?
Well, you know, as we move forward, and the reasons we created the downtown design guidelines was understanding that we wanted to raise the level of design and facade enhancements and development that was coming into the DDA district. So we went through a very comprehensive project with a very well-recognized and consultant, and we presented those downtown design guidelines to Planning Commission and City Council and talked about our options of how would we move these forward. You know, would we incorporate the design guidelines actually into the complete ordinance? Would we move forward with a design review board that then would still, you know, would facilitate that process of having this board of experts who would be able to review this against those design guidelines and then take it to Planning Commission. And that seemed to be the best way to move forward, and that's why we're moving this way. We know that ordinance review is years away. We also wanted then to complete that downtown master plan, because that's actually going to be very a critical component of determining land use and parking and things like that in the DDA district. So there's all kinds of pieces to the puzzle. I think that this is a relatively straightforward one that gives Planning Commission a real tool. It takes away, one of the things that Elizabeth King mentioned, and the reason they like these types of design guidelines and overlay districts, is that it takes away the it takes away the planning by kind of personal opinion process. So now you have guidelines. These are very, very comprehensive guidelines. I mean, 114 pages of design guidelines that are very comprehensive. You know, they're they are pretty specific. We don't address parking. I mean, that's not one of the things that is covered under design guidelines. That is an ordinance issue. That's not a design guideline issue. We're not designing parking lots. We're looking at facades and expansions or new developments. I mean, signage, things like that, but it's the visual aspects. It's not parking. So whatever happened with Green Lantern, it would have had to go to ZBA because it didn't meet the parking requirements. It doesn't matter who reviewed it. I mean, it's a parking ordinance issue, not a design review issue. So I just think this facilitates the process. It slips in very nicely. It gives everybody an extra tool. If we're serious about becoming a redevelopment-ready community, we've got to start to move in this direction. So,
Okay, thank you. Ms. Kempner?
Yes, I do have a couple comments. One is in the in the guidelines, it actually, an appendix deals with parking, and it suggests a new parking ratio. So if we're adopting it in its entirety, including the appendix. So that new parking ratio would apply as overriding.
well, I don't think so, because we know we have our parking study
That's what this
update that's
says.
coming. All right, you know what? We could add in here that this doesn't apply to parking, if that would, facilitate it.
I'll look up at the
Where
I mean, I'd have to go back and look. I mean, what I remember them saying is that, yes, at some point in time, parking needs to be taken a look at, but that there's no recommendations in the design guidelines that specifically say, hey, for parking, if you're building a residential, you should only do A, B, C, or D. I mean, they do say in there that at some point, we need to address parking, which we know we do, and that's what we're doing through the master plan and the parking study update. But if it would make you more comfortable, we can put in here that, this doesn't apply. What it applies to is how a parking lot would look. So we would certainly want to try and make it visually more appealing, but we're not trying to regulate how many parking spaces per the ordinance. So we could add in there that, if you said this is clearly, if this becomes a parking issue, then it needs to be reviewed by the ZBA or, whoever.
Right. I think one of my other issues is that while there are some things that are specific in the design guidelines, they're guidelines. They were written with a certain amount of vagueness because that's what a guideline does. It's much harder to have a good ordinance. A little flexibility is good. Vagueness is not so good. So if I see something that says signs should be an appropriate size, that's hard to be an overriding our regular ordinance, because somebody's going to come in here and go, this is an appropriate size to me.
But that's why you have that design review board and those experts who can look and say, hey, look, I mean, if you have an architect and you have somebody who's, got a good design sense, and somebody brings in a sign that's going to be, 3 times bigger than the building, I mean, that isn't an appropriate size. So, I mean, that's the point of the design review board.
And I would agree, and their role is advisory, so they'll come to us and say the sign doesn't really work, and then we look at our ordinance and say, but what this says now is that what's in the guidelines overrides this. So then we have a huge debate on what an appropriate sign is. I guess what I'm going to get to is that I absolutely agree with the residents that it makes more sense to start bit by bit going through our ordinance, and we take the biggest issues first, and it might take till we get to the very last, smaller things. It might take 2 years for those, but we can start to address the big stuff, and we do it right from the beginning. This also worries me because, well, we have an overriding, so we'll push that back, we'll push it back. The ordinance never actually happens.
Well, we know the ordinances need to be changed. So that's not, but we also know that's probably a 24-month process.
To get to every single one of them.
But in the meantime, then, we have a lot of bad design happening. So we're going to allow that just to appease somebody, to make sure that a sign doesn't quite get over.
But it's bigger than a sign. Townhouses on a large lot with substantial depth. Again, that's very, very vague. Those can be used as transitions.
But they still have to meet the ordinance.
But they don't. This
yes,
overrides the ordinance.
But no, it doesn't.
It's where
it doesn't.
things conflict, this wins out.
So
That's what this
let's
says.
use a sign for an example. Even if it's like, what do you call it, the ones that...
The projecting sign,
Yeah,
a
the
blade
projecting
sign.
signs. It still has to meet our ordinance from the standpoint of size.
But this says where it conflicts, these win.
So with the blade sign,
Yeah, the blade
they'd be
sign.
permitted to have the blade sign, but it would have to meet the sizing requirement.
Right.
I'm a little concerned with the statement of an architect with good design sense, what we all think we do.
Well, that's
But-
why I
but
pointed
it's
to
still
you, Marty.
But it's still subjective. And
That's why you have a-
let's use the example of the sign. What an appropriate sign is for a building. Well, I may think something's appropriate, and I've been doing this a long time, but I may be wrong. But the next guy, and we always set precedent. The next guy's going to come up and say, my building's as big as his, I want a sign that size. And if someone says, well, it was appropriate for that building, but it's not for yours, we're going down a very difficult path.
But that's why you have a complete advisory board of more than one person and more than...
Yeah, but they're still subjective, and that, I don't like regulations at all. I'm very much against regulations, but we have to have numbers on things.
Ms. Buckler?
We do have numbers on things, if
Yeah,
it's
I
an
know.
ordinance, but
I know.
we, even as a governing board, change our
Can.
opinion.
Can't, do have
on
discretion.
when there
Absolutely.
is opportunity, we have granted
And-
A for candidate A and something different for candidate B.
Let me continue. I was going to save something for comments, but let me ask some questions. I watched the Zoning Board of Appeals from last week. Why the heck didn't that come to us for Green Lantern? I mean, we can grant variances for parking. We do that all the time.
For a site plan review, yeah.
Hell yeah. Pardon me. Heck yeah. And if the applicant doesn't like it, they appeal to the Zoning Board of Appeals.
That's generally how I thought it was done.
That's how I thought it was done. And I looked at a sideways image. Are they coming to us for anything?
They will, if they get a variance, they will have to come before the planning commission for site plan approval on the outdoor seating area.
But what about the facade?
And the parking, that should have all been part of the
Yeah,
site
why
plan.
isn't that coming to us? And again, this isn't something where we want the power, it's our job. And I feel we were bypassed for some reason, not because I'm not insulted, but that's our job. And I look at this elevation, and from what I'm hearing, was it piecemealed? They want to get the variance for the parking. Why didn't they come to us? Why didn't we do it all at one time with the facade? Are they coming to us with a facade? It's a wholesale difference.
Well, if I
building.
might interject, I think they have the right to
They do.
seek a variance before
They
the ZBA, if that's
do
what they
have that
want
right.
to do. And I don't think the city's in a position to tell them, no, you can't.
Let me ask you, are they coming to us for the facade?
Most likely, yes. It was the thought of the applicant that the outdoor seating area is crucial to their operation. And when they do that, they're deficient on parking, they're required to meet current standards. So they're seeking a variance. It's entirely possible that if there's no variance, then there could possibly be no project.
Okay, but that doesn't change anything. I mean,
Right.
the way I thought it worked, and is that they can elect to go take that step, but it's something that usually comes to us because we can do it.
Right.
We've granted parking variances all the time, or not all the time, depending on what the situation is. So I'm just curious, and what I'm getting at is and I'll continue here, is, we've talked in months past about some of these buildings that are being changed administratively. And I personally, in my good design sense, think that it's a little too much. And again, it's not because we want the power, it's because that's our job. I'm looking at this list, thank you very much, this list of the site plan review facades for administrative, and I'm looking at these. These are all almost 100% considerably smaller scale than what was proposed in our ordinance.
Yep.
And, the only one that has a number on it is Royal Oak, and it says addition or expansion of a building less than 500 square feet or 10% of the gross floor area, whichever is less. That makes a lot of sense. But these are, in my opinion, these are minor changes, but the scale much smaller than what we are proposing. And so, in my apparently good design sense, I think maybe our administrative review is getting ahead of things here. And that's why I asked about the green lantern, because that's a wholesale change, at least from what I looked at on the elevation of the facade. That's why I'm asking.
The variance was their logical first step.
Okay.
Oh, Ms. Buckler, yes?
Are you done, Marty?
Sure, I'll be done for now.
Okay. I wanted to discuss the parking thing. I do not think the design guidelines appendix or themselves conflict with our zoning requirements are specific. They give alternate theories and things to think about in the process, but they do not specify X number of parking spaces per square foot of this restaurant. They do talk about case studies where they used an alternate analysis or an alternate allowance for parking, but they do not specify. Our parking ordinance is like, if you have a restaurant and you have this many tables, you need this many parking spaces, and if you have this many square feet of this, it does not conflict in that respect. It does give people something to think about, and certainly if they come to us with a variance request for parking, which hopefully we see those and they don't go straight to ZBA because it'd be a nice part of an overall site plan review, but understanding the machinations, I get it. It gives something for us to discuss. So I'm okay with the appendix. I'm okay with the way the design guidance are written, and I don't think they trump. I'm still a little conflicted that it becomes another quasi-regulatory body. I think I've worked myself through most of that because it does add some steps to a developer in the downtown district. But when I drive down our downtown district and I realize this is years in the making and different administrations and trying to get something in the storefronts, it's such a hodgepodge. Some of that is charming, but some of it is really problematic. And like, it'd be nice to have a vision, because that downtown didn't turn that way in 5 years or 10 years even. It's taken 30 or 40 years to get to that point. In the next 30 or 40 years, could we turn it back into something far more functional and cohesive? And that's what I would like to see that outlives all of us. So those are my comments. I'm done.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Murad.
So I'm kind of looking at this as a short-term fix, because I know in our plans, the thing we want to get to next is our master plan, and we've talked about doing a whole rewrite of our ordinance book. So I think at the time that it comes to doing the whole ordinance book, that's when you take, like, in the comments from Mr. Barnett, that we then roll it all into an ordinance, and this whole separate thing that we're doing now becomes part of that ordinance, and not, like that whole design overlay, everything just becomes part of the ordinance.
And we're kind of doing that
Maybe
to
it
an
even
extent.
gets rid of the design review board, and it all comes back to us. Potentially.
Well, I think it's
That's
nice.
the way I'm looking at it.
It's nice to have the input of the design review board, since the guidelines are over 100 pages. It saves us from having to
Yes.
go through it in detail.
Yes, and they're doing a master plan, we're going to do a master plan, then we can take everything from those two master plans and coordinate it into an ordinance. And our master plan's not going to be done in 6 months. No. It's going to be 1.5 to 2 years.
Yeah.
Okay? And this gets guidelines in place now, to move us forward for a while until we can get to that. All right? And we can see what changes, we can make changes anytime.
And perhaps we will like how the
Yes.
design review board functions and keep that as
and keep it as part of our, so it's giving us that. And then I take, like, the item we just passed. If we put that into like this flow chart that we have, where would it be? The property owner came in, had a plan. It's over the 750 square feet, so it's going to have to come before us. The board would have reviewed it first, and it would have still come to us.
Right.
And I think their design meets the guidelines, basically, in reviewing it all. So I think we're on the right track to get something in place now, and then years down the road, we can, I can't even say fix it, but just implement it.
Tweak it.
Tweak it and implement it and do it right,
Okay.
Okay, so that's the way I feel about it. I'm looking at it.
Anyone else? Mr. Richardson?
One other thing, I
Oh.
do agree with Mr. Smith, too, on some of the things that have been done administratively, I think should have come to us, and I actually do think the whole Green Lantern thing should come before us.
And it sounds like it will, should it move forward.
Yeah.
Mr. Richardson?
Okay, in the main, I agree with Mr. Murad, and I endorse his comments. Just one kind of parenthetical note. This is going to seem really picky, lawyerly, which nobody, it's already going to be received hostilely because I use that word. But in the both ordinance amendments, when it discusses administrative review, it uses the term appeal. If the applicant does not agree with the administrative decision, the applicant can appeal. And like I said, it's a nitpicky point, but I don't think our body is an appellate body. I think when there's administrative review, we're delegating to them our authority, sort of not ad hoc, but just for certain things, and we always retain supervisory authority. So I would substitute the word review for appeal. You can seek a review by the whole planning commission instead of appealing to the planning commission. I just think legally that's more accurate. So there's that. But getting on to more general comments, I don't see any direct conflicts between the development guidelines, the design guidelines, and existing ordinances. I think, there's language in there which says in the event of a conflict, the guidelines shall control, but that's standard legalese. You're going to find that whenever you have amendments. If you actually look at the provisions of the guidelines and the ordinances, I don't see any head-to-head conflicts. So I think our sadly outdated ordinance requirements are going to be in control throughout this whole process. So that issue doesn't really concern me. I see the guidelines as an opportunity to kind of quality assurance opportunity. They are vague, but in the case of guidelines, that's a good thing. You want to have give and take with a developer or renovator, with standards kept in mind, high quality standards, and I think that's what we're doing here. So I think that's a good idea. The extra layer of review, I'm not hearing any feedback from other communities that that's a big problem. It kind of seems like it might be a problem to me as a non-developer, just looking on the outside looking in, but I'm not hearing any feedback that communities that do this are having difficulties with their development projects. So I'm not going to see that as a potential problem. The square footage that issues that Commissioner Smith raised, I think, are worth some more thought on our part. Those are what we're proposing here are larger renovations, larger expansions than other communities, we're proposing that they be administratively reviewed. And maybe these square footages are too large. Maybe they should be cut back some. I like the idea of a square footage approach rather than a percentage approach. I think that's that's the sounder way to do it. And I don't know what the square footage might be actually, but it does kind of concern me that we're looking at much larger projects than other communities are for administrative level review, and it might not be appropriate. So that's really my major reservation. On the whole, I think this is a step in the right direction.
The other communities ranged like from 2,000 to 5,000 square feet, so I thought, okay, we'll just slide it in there at 3,000 because it's kind of in the middle. And I looked at community size and, kind of where we sat, so that's why we put that 3,000 in.
Well, I guess, the scale of our downtown is small. We have small buildings. We have at least narrower streets than many communities. We need to take that part of it in consideration, I think.
And we can adjust that. There aren't many 3,000 square foot buildings. They're like at 1,800 to 20. So, I mean, you're not going to see many 3,000 square foot projects anyway. Because to your point, the buildings are either like 4,000 or more, or they're under 2,500. So it could be then that you change it to 2,500 or whatever.
Okay.
Nothing further.
A quick follow-up to that. I happened to notice that Oak Park just changed their site plan review standards for what could be approved administratively, but I couldn't find what they changed on their website. Do you know anything about that?
No, I should have, I was looking at that late last week, and I could have reached out to Kim, and I didn't because I had, we'd looked at multiple other communities, so
I was just curious.
Yeah.
I saw that they just became RRC certified as well. So.
They did, yeah.
Okay. Anyone else, or who would like to go next, Mr. Patterson?
I just have a comment about who will belong to the board, or on the board, appointed by the board. Can we also add, like, a citizen, somebody maybe without a professional background in design, just to give a citizen's approach, citizen's view
Sure.
of what, just so they have an idea,
Yeah, the Design Review Board, that was just the recommendations that were made to us, that those are the types of people you want to have sit on it. Once again, it's a board that's appointed by the council, so
right.
I have I think it's always nice to have citizen representation.
Right, just so
I think that a lot of
the non-professional designer or architect or just a citizen, if they happen to be, I guess, then you get a bonus, but just add one spot for a citizen.
Well, and I got the sense that we were, because it has been, some communities like to reach out, some like to keep it internal. Once again, that's a council decision. We obviously have a lot of residents who are very qualified to sit on this in multiple different, so in a sense, you're getting a citizen's viewpoint, but it surely,
Potentially. You could have somebody.
Definitely.
There's 0 members from the
citizens. And I don't know, I'm just throwing this out there, and maybe it's something for the council to consider and to think about. But, on our board, we have high school board members. It might be fun to have on this somebody from the high school who is, maybe they're not a voting member, so they wouldn't necessarily be in here, but they could be added to the bylaws where, once again, you're just incorporating maybe a younger vision. I think that would be
I like that idea as well. Yeah, for sure.
So it doesn't become a voting member, but...
Right. No, and I think you've done great work on this, and I appreciate it. So
thank you.
I have a quick question.
Yes, Ms. Kempner.
When we were looking at the administrative review comparisons, how many, I think Ferndale's RRC certified, right? Are any of these other cities?
Lathrop Village is, and get my
We looked at mostly RRC communities because those are the ones that Elizabeth King recommended. So when I talked to Elizabeth and I said, okay, so, and Tim, I think you kept the notes on what communities those were. You know, she sent us to like 3 or 4 that were RRC communities around the state of Michigan who had created administrative review based on square footage. And that's where you saw ranges from like 2,000 up to, 5,000 or whatever. And then we did actually run across like some others that are doing the same thing, just in research.
Anything to add, Mr. McLean?
Yeah, just Lathrop Village and Ferndale are RRC certified. Clawson and Troy, I believe, are engaged in the program.
And then my comment on the end part is, I also feel like that's a little overkill for our town, for our city, for our downtown. I think the administrative approval would probably take most of the buildings, unless it's a new construction. And I think that I'm a big proponent of the fact that 1 or 2 people should have minimal powers for administrative approval. I think there's a reason that somebody said, we need planning commissions filled of a number of people from different backgrounds so that everybody can look at it and we can get the best end result. So I like the idea of administrative approvals being really fairly minor sort of things.
I would agree with that, too.
Anything else right now? Does anyone have any additional comments on anything other than the administrative section at this point? No? 'Cause it seems like that's what we really need to get into then.
Yeah. That's the biggest bugaboo I have. The threshold of administrative is, to me, quite high.
Right, so that's what seems like what's left to sort out, just this threshold.
Yeah, and I will, I've said it before, and several others have brought it up. I do see this with a developer's eye, that this could be a piling on of another layer that they may not have to deal with. It may not be a problem, but you run into this with a lot of towns. It's just one after another, and I think with the size of our town, it could be perceived as that. That in itself, to me, is not a deal breaker, but it just could be perceived that way by some potential people that want to come in and do something here. So.
Okay, so on to then, what should be the threshold for administrative review? So we have a couple different ideas thrown out by what's suggested in the ordinance and also by the comparison communities. It sounds like the general feeling of the commission is maybe that what's suggested in the ordinance is a threshold that's a little bit too low, that we would like a higher threshold. Does that make sense? Am I saying it the right way or reverse?
Smaller building size.
Yeah, a smaller building size. So then it seems like the next step down is maybe something like what Royal Oak does. The 500 square feet would be a step down with regard to the additions. So does the commission want to, maybe we can take on the 3,000 gross square feet number first and then maybe move on and talk about the 750? Where does everyone stand on that 3,000 gross square feet? So that alterations to buildings, 3,000, go ahead, Mr.
So if you look at Royal Oak, so if you've got a 3,000 square foot building, the 10%, doing the 10% gross floor.
Says whichever is least.
Yeah, whichever is least.
500 square feet or 10%, whichever is less.
Yep.
Yeah,
I think that makes a lot of sense.
I think it makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
So the 500 or 10%, whichever is less, the same type of thing.
Yep.
Now that one is
Or expansions or alterate instead of the 3,000 or instead of the 750?
And let me also throw out that that's gross floor area, not gross square footage. I don't know if their definition is a little bit different for that. Probably
I don't
not.
know what their definition is.
Yeah.
I would say, because we're looking at it from the streetscape, it'd be gross building area.
Yeah, I like going with the gross square footage of the building, too. Okay, so follow up to Ms. Kempner then. So the 500 or 10%, would that apply for both instances then? Alterations involving an existing structure Well, it couldn't really apply for the 3,000 square feet, right?
Say that again?
So the way that this is written now, and correct me if I'm wrong, Vivian, but if there was a building that was 2,900 square feet and they were putting in a brand-new facade on the whole building, per the way that it's written now, that would be administratively reviewed and approved, correct?
Yes.
So if we're not comfortable with that 3,000, we need to come up with a different number. The 500 square feet, or 10%, whichever is less, would take the place of the 750, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, but Royal Oak, if I may, Royal Oak doesn't define the size of a building you're starting with. It just says,
Right.
any shall constitute an alteration, addition, or expansion to the existing structure, basically of any existing structure of 500 square feet or 10% of the gross floor area, whichever is less. It doesn't have a threshold of how big the building is or isn't.
So if I'm coming
Start
in with a facade change to the front facade of my building, how does staff determine the 10% or less, or
That's
500?
a facade change. That's the exterior materials, as far as I would be concerned.
Right, but the way that this is reading, that would be approved administratively. If we took that 3,000 number
So there's
out.
two things. There's a facade change, which is exterior materials.
Right.
And there's also an addition. So we have two
Right.
things here.
Two separate things we're
Right,
dealing
right,
with,
right.
yes. So are we saying then the 500 square feet or 10% thing, that would be for an addition?
Or
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, they say alteration, but let's say addition or expansion of existing structure. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Okay, so alteration, I'm assuming in
Whatever
this,
an alteration is.
I'm assuming that refers to the facade.
The facades. So it's alterations, and then there's expansions. So the alterations would be facades. And once again, I mean, I don't want to keep talking about the, redevelopment-ready community, but we need to be kind of looking at what their communities are working on, and not just necessarily to Royal Oak, who's not an RRC community as far as I know. I mean, they are not, and they're a whole different animal when it comes to building size, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we probably need to find a community, and those were the ones that ranged from 2,000 to 5,000. And some of them actually did say, or, with so many square feet, or 10% or 15%, whichever is less. So.
But that would be for additions, right?
For the additions, just for the additions, yes.
And it sounds like the additions, unless anyone else has something to add, it sounds like we're kind of on the track of the 500 square feet or 10%, whichever is less.
Is less.
Is that generally the consensus? Yeah?
Yes.
So when we get into the other, which is alterations.
Right.
I look down this list, and I see cleaning, repair of existing, replacement of existing, restoration of original. This is all replacement stuff. Minor building modifications that do not alter the facade beyond normal repairs. Everything here is a replacement or a fix.
Yeah, where's the 2,000 to 5,000 coming from, Vivian? I'm not seeing that in this chart. Am I missing something?
Yeah, the only
I
one
don't know what chart you're looking at, so I guess I didn't see that chart.
The administration site plan review. Tim knows it.
What are we looking at, Tim?
We're looking at
the different communities.
Other communities and what they allow for administrative approval. We looked at Clawson, Ferndale, Lathrop Village, Royal Oak, and Troy.
Those aren't the ones we looked at, though. We looked at RRC communities. We looked at like West Elm and the three that.
How do those other communities you looked at, how do they compare in the scale to Berkeley? Are they bigger than Berkeley? Smaller than Berkeley? Same as Berkeley?
Well, some are smaller and some are bigger.
Okay.
And they had a similar language that talked about alterations to buildings 2,000 to 5,000.
Okay. Yeah,
Is
those
that
aren't.
one of the smaller ones or one of the
Yeah,
bigger ones?
those aren't in here, and we didn't have anything for square footage in here. So
Yeah, I didn't see that.
Yeah, and that, because that's what we looked at. We looked at some, so I'm not trying, but the specific ones that, we tried to pull this language from were communities that were RRC communities that were, there were 3 of them that Elizabeth mentioned, and I'd have to go back through my notes to pull them out.
Well, Madam Chair, I think we said that Ferndale and Lathrop were both RRC. And
They
I mean,
are.
those are pretty restrictive, the way this is written. Non-structural architectural design changes to non-residential uses.
Done.
Minor building modifications do not alter the facade beyond normal repairs, height, or floor area. I mean, that's pretty
That's why I
restrictive.
say you go down and it's repair, replace existing stuff.
Right.
And that's the only thing they're allowing for administrative review.
Right,
So
what-
like
what
if
I had
somebody
talked-
wanted to just
yeah.
replace their windows to more
Well, sure,
energy efficient,
yeah.
Right.
they wouldn't have to come before us.
When I talked to Elizabeth, we
changing.
specifically spoke about communities that were using square footage to make that, define the difference between, the PC and administrative review. So those, I didn't go out and do, all of these other communities. We looked at some to see if they were doing, that square footage thing. But my discussion with Elizabeth from RRC was, specifically communities that are using, because she said, yes, I think this is a good way to define administrative review from planning is by putting square footage. And so that's how we got to this point, is because she said she thought this was a good way to move forward. And then she gave me, like 3 communities that we went out and we looked at, and they're the ones that kind of ranged in size, and some of them included, one of them actually I think said something about parking, but I didn't think, when Tim and I talked about it, because the design guidelines aren't talking about parking, it didn't seem like you had to, we're not trying to legislate parking.
Right.
So that didn't seem like it had to be in there. That was kind of a more broad. So that's the reason we got to this square footage thing wasn't because we're looking at Ferndale and Royal Oak, but because talking to RRC, they thought this was a good strategy for determining how to define administrative review from, your planning commission review.
Okay.
Well, I don't think I have a problem with the square footage, other than, as far as I'm concerned, I don't care if the building's 1,000 square feet or 5,000 square feet. That means nothing to me as a basis to start. We're saying the addition is 500 square feet. I think that makes more sense to us in our community.
But this, I think we have 2 separate things,
Yeah.
right? So the addition portion, we're all in agreement with. So we're talking about, I think now, if a building comes in and it's 2,000 square feet, does it even come to us if they're changing their whole facade?
Absolutely.
So that, then your comment would then be that we remove alteration. It's just expansion. That would be approved.
Well, no, when you say changing their facade, we talked the last couple of months about some examples, and we talked about the previous ordinance, and I think we established 50% of the exposed facades of the building. That's the threshold, whether it comes to us or it goes administratively. Am I talking about the same thing?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that's the way that that's written for the, right now, as proposed, for the sections outside of these new design guidelines area.
So this is just for the design overlay district, not for anything
And we,
Well, we're thinking both.
it could go that
Yeah,
route
both.
too.
Why be inconsistent from one to the other?
Well,
Most of what's going to happen in regards to facade changes is going to be in the design overlay district, but what if it's something on Woodward?
Then there's got
Right,
nothing
that's
to do with,
separate.
yeah.
Right,
yeah.
but we still have to figure out the way,
100%.
and I think we need to keep it consistent.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I do too.
Ms. Buckler?
Yeah, I think 3,000 is just too big of a number
Sure.
for our downtown area. Only if I were to like look at the buildings and group them into 3 categories, like under 1,000 square feet, 1,000 to 3,000, and then 3,000 and above. I would say probably we have probably have 40, 40, and 20, percentage-wise.
Well, there's a lot of
small
3,000
buildings.
plus buildings. They're not in our retail districts, but think of the whole DDA district.
True, if you go
There's a
further
lot of
yeah.
buildings that are well over 3,000.
I definitely want to capture those, but I also want to capture those small buildings in our core areas, that core retail area, where it can really become problematic if it's inconsistent. And I'm not saying I don't trust the design review board, because they're kind of there for that and that administrative part of it. And I know that there wouldn't be the advisory board, and it would be administrative review, so it's just like 2 people. But I would just be more comfortable if that number was a little closer on the lower end of
Yeah,
the.
I mean, you could set it at 1,500 square
Yeah,
feet.
something like that, where we kind of capture just a little bit more of our market share, because I do think we're all like, we really should be involved with that. And it's okay if it's, I think I'd be happier with that lower number. I'm not sure exactly what the
Lower
number
number
is,
with
but
respect to what?
square footage of the building before it triggers the where it stays inside the administrative review.
So 1,500 square feet, you're thinking?
Instead of
Michelle?
3,000 square feet.
Does what?
So if it's 1,500 square feet.
And they're changing
101, it would-
100% of the facade, it doesn't come to us?
No, it does.
No, it would not.
If it's under 1,500, well, true, but I mean, it could be paint, Marty, or it could be.
It could be.
But like,
But
I'm
my
not
point
really sure
is,
that all of that
a
needs to-
1,500 square foot building is still a building, and I don't think the size of the beginning building or the size of the building has anything to do with it. If it's a
You want it
500 square
You want
foot
it based on
building,
qualitative things, not
The amount
quantitative
of
things.
change.
the
You don't wanna do it on
50%,
the
right, if the 50%'s the right number, if they're changing 50% of the facades exposed,
But I think that's hard, because you're like, what if you're just painting the whole thing?
But didn't we go through that last time
did
where
go
we
through
said
that
that paint
last
doesn't
time.
count?
Paint doesn't
Changing
count, we did
material.
say.
Changing
So
material.
say you're changing
But
just
see-
the whole front. Say you're doing the whole front of the facade, pretty typical probably, not doing anything to the back. That's 50%, right?
Yeah, and
well,
that's
it
where I
depends on
have
the
a problem.
exposure of the building.
Well, say it's butted up against one another.
That was the spirit of the ordinance as it was
Yes.
written.
Okay.
Now, but we have these
And it was
freestanding
50%
buildings.
of the front facade.
Like to
Right.
the into Tallulah's.
So you're
I don't mean to keep bringing them up, but
I
fine.
understand,
And
but
it was
you're gonna.
it's a wonderful looking building.
It does.
But they changed more than 50% of that building. A lot of it's paint,
And we said paint doesn't count.
but they changed a lot. The 100% of the front facade changed.
Yeah.
And a lot of the other little pieces changed.
So I know, that's why we're working through this.
Yeah, that's what I'm
right?
getting at. I don't care if it's a 400 square foot building, a 3,000 square foot building, or 10,000. If they're changing a percentage of the existing envelope, I think it comes to us. We have a threshold.
Okay, so you're in the 50% camp,
Yeah,
you're
it
in the
doesn't make any sense to
1,500
me.
square
Yeah.
foot camp.
Square foot is an addition.
Right.
But if we put an addition, we have a threshold of a square footage. But you could have a building that's the size of a two-car garage with standing, and they decide to change everything, that should come to us.
Right, and as example, I'll go back to the one we just reviewed, okay? If they weren't putting the second floor on, they just wanted to add that little back.
Yep.
If we look at it a percentage, because I forget the size of that, the addition
Yeah.
on the
It
first
wasn't
floor.
much, 380 feet or something.
Yeah,
280.
so, and it's a almost 800 square foot building now.
Yeah.
So that would have been less than the 50%, or the 500
Yeah.
square feet. It could have best been, I mean, if it was just the first floor,
Sure.
it could have been administratively reviewed and gone on its way.
Or 10%, whichever
Or
is less, so it would have
Right.
come to us.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've landed on the 500 square feet or 10% for
For
expansion.
additions, that's fine. But I don't think the percentage of facade or percentage of envelope that changes, I don't care if it's a big building or a small building. I don't think that matters.
Yeah.
They're
Okay.
making a wholesale change to a structure. It's this big or as big as a barn. It doesn't matter to me.
I'm going to kind of tend to agree more with Ms. Buckler, no offense.
That's why we're here.
And I think the way that I'm framing it in my mind is that your 1,500 square foot building is not going to have as big of an impact on a larger downtown as something that's substantially larger. So I'm okay with going with that 1,500 square foot number, just because I think the staff can review something that's a smaller portion of our downtown administratively. When we're looking at larger buildings, obviously they have a larger impact. They set the tone a little bit more for the entire downtown, so I would be more comfortable then having those come to the Planning Commission. I do think 3,000 square feet is a little high, because our buildings are all smaller.
Well,
So
let me ask-
I would
let me ask you a question,
cast
if
my
I
side to
may.
the 1,500 square feet, yeah,
We have a lot of buildings in town that have a 20-foot wide facade, give or take.
sure.
Our ordinance has always read, if 50% of that facade changes, it has to come to the Planning Commission. Well, is that building 10 feet deep, 1,000 feet deep? It doesn't matter. The exposed surface
Right, yeah.
that affects
yeah.
the city, whether it's big or small, is 50%. I don't think the dimensions of the building have anything to do with it.
Right, and I think what's happened in the past with a couple of them that we've had is because they were freestanding buildings, so now you had 4 facades.
Right.
But really, maybe one facade was changing 100%, so when you divide that by 4 sides, well, that's only 25%. But my feeling is it should be if any one facade changes more than 50%, it needs to come before us.
Especially the street front facade.
Yeah, especially the street front.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with doing the percentage, but what I have heard being said is it's the square footage that better fits the RRC guidelines. So I guess I'd like to understand why that is when.
What
And
RRC...
again, the two examples we received for Ferndale and Lathrop don't include square footage.
Right.
So we just need a little more background, I think, as to why that's better for RRC.
Well, so it was an option that we had talked about at a previous planning commission meeting, and should we determine that this is split by a square footage option, and that's why I reached out to Ms. King from RRC. What RRC wants to see is more administrative approval, because they want to see that we're a community who's making development and changes for businesses easy, and that we're not making them, if it's a small building and they are doing their front and rear facades, holding them up, putting them through a 6 or 12 or whatever week process. What RRC is really encouraging is to be able to take those smaller projects and do them administratively to be redevelopment ready, to be business friendly. When a business, has to come here, and then they have to go back, and then they come back again, and then maybe something happens, and it slows that process down for them. For what redevelopment ready means, that we're nimble, that we are looking at smaller projects and saying these can be administratively approved, because then we keep the process moving more quickly. We recognize that there's a certain level where Planning Commission and the Design Review Board need to look at these because they make a bigger impact. But because we have design guidelines in place, we have a design, overlay district now that guides what happens. Now they encourage that additional administrative review. So I'm just, this is what they push. If you go to RRC training over and over and over again, it's facilitating the process for the business owners, for those investors, and how do you do that as much as you can with administrative review on those smaller projects. So that's where, how do you define a smaller project? I think RRC would be not, I think they would say, if you have a 1,200 square foot building and it's 10 feet wide, and you're saying, okay, if they're going to do more than 50%, now it's got to go to Planning Commission, that probably seems, that's excessive for RRC. They would look at you and say, you guys, come on, this can be administratively approved. So I'm just, as long as we're going down that route, that is what we're trying to help meet those guidelines too. And nobody's putting it out there and saying that we don't have standards that everybody's going to have to. If it's administratively approved, it still means they have to be, it's measured against those guidelines. Nobody's going to be able to get, in fact, it'll probably be even, it'll be just as stringent.
So that is one advantage we have. We didn't have any standards before.
Exactly.
Now we at least would have a standard that something's measured against.
And that's what RRC likes, the fact that there's design guidelines, that there's a design overlay district. Those are all things they see as positive things that we've done as we've moved towards this RRC, through this RRC process.
So maybe it is different. So maybe, originally I was agreeing that the standards should be the same, but maybe it is 50%, but for these particular guidelines, it is a square footage because we have the additional guidelines to be utilized.
Yeah. And that's what I mean, that's, I think, why they support that. And they say, you know, yeah, this is a good way to do it, because you've got guidelines, you've got a design overlay district. And so, you know, you can administratively review things that otherwise, because you didn't have those guidelines and those, you know, those parameters in place, that, of course, it would have to go to Planning Commission.
However,
Mr. Patterson?
they have allowed, I'm sorry, they have allowed other places to have lesser administrative approvals and still be RRC certified.
Yes.
Oh, for sure.
So it's not an absolute. I mean, we have some level of administrative approval. It's not absolutely necessary that get huge in order to become RRC certified.
Mr. Patterson?
I was pretty much the same. Like, the two that are on our list are pretty much 0% that get administrative, unless you're just going to fix something or repair the facade.
So-
I mean, that they're very strict. So I don't think that having a number or a percentage affects RRC. Now, I could be completely wrong on that, but
Yeah, I can only tell you what they tell us at training. I have the
Sure,
PowerPoint
sure.
presentation, and, you know, talking to Elizabeth, who's our liaison to MEDC, is, you know, they want to see additional, they want to see
and I'm
more
not disagreeing with your
administrative,
training, but I'm just saying on this list that we were provided,
Right.
There's two, and both of them are very minimal modifications can be done. Minor is
Much
the
less
one
than
word.
we're proposing.
Is Ferndale really saying that, though? Because it says non-structural architectural design changes. To me, that means the change of any facade, provided it's not structural, can be approved administratively.
I think they have a pretty high tolerance for administrative review in Ferndale.
But Lathrop Village is minor building modifications.
Lathrop Village is much different,
So I
correct.
mean, we have two
They don't
extremes
even
on our
really
list
have a
here.
downtown, so I don't know that you can use Lathrop Village as a comparison, because they don't
And
have a
it's
business
just what we're
district.
provided with.
Right, I get
I
that.
didn't go on your,
Yeah, I get that.
you know, so
Structural design changes.
So,
I am in favor of a percentage, not the square foot.
So back to kind of following up on Ms. Shadle's comments, and maybe you illuminated this more, it does kind of speak to why we should treat things in the DDA or the design guideline overlay area different than how we would treat the rest of the city, which has no facade standards.
Right.
This is the only area that we have a standard for. We should be able to look at those guidelines and know what we're getting. We should be getting exactly what's in those guidelines, with some, you know, maybe smudges around the edges here and there. I think they should be treated differently. The downtown areas, the areas covered by the design guidelines, and every other area of the city are two separate things, because one has standards and the other does not.
Chair,
Yes.
I'm going back and forth on this particular one. I tend to agree with you about the building, the square foot versus percentage. As long as the square foot is fairly minimal.
So what would you throw out for that?
Well, I wish I knew more about what our average building square footages are, so I could get a handle on how many would come here and how many would be administratively approved. What we have going here, I think, is a philosophical debate. The size should not matter. It's the responsibility of this body and no one else to approve all facade changes over 50% or what have you. And I'm not sure that's really necessary with smaller buildings, because there are guidelines in place, because there are ordinance requirements. The city is still doing the review. We still have overall supervisory control over what's getting approved, and it should be a consistent process. But I guess, you know, I take some, I give some weight to those who think, just philosophically, we should be the ones to review even the smallest building which wants to put a new facade on. Either we should be or we don't have to be, and I guess I kind of think that we don't have to be with the smaller buildings. I might go down to 1,000.
Okay.
So you could have a 20-foot wide building that's 50 feet deep. It's 1,000 square feet. in a row like we have, of buildings. So they could change 100% of the front and the back facade, and that wouldn't come to us?
Yes, under what I'm throwing out there,
I don't
but
agree
it's
with
not
that.
as if it wouldn't be reviewed and approved by the city.
Okay, well, I don't agree with that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think if any one facade is going to change more than 50%, it should come before us. I don't care if it's
Even though we have
1,000
standards,
square feet or 10,000 square feet.
even though we have standards of what it should look like now?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone who hasn't commented on this part want to weigh in?
Well, I haven't exactly said anything yet, but I've been kind of wavering back and forth myself. I'm not a big fan of having multiple standards. And we've debated on our 50% facade several times since I've been here. I kind of lean toward that because we've been following that, and I hate to have one group of people say we have to do it this way, and then another group say we have to do it another way. And in a city as small as Berkeley, I don't think we need two sets of standards like that.
Okay, fair enough.
And, I mean, looking at it from that, you're going to have somebody saying, well, we're in the design, we're following these guidelines, and again, they're guidelines, they're not standards. And they don't exactly fit 100% in with what we have as part of our master plan, our guidelines of our city, or what's the ordinances of our city. So it kind of falls in a very sticky area, and to create 1,000 square feet or 1,500 square feet or even 3,000 square feet is hard to do. But on the same note, you also want to have that ability to have the quick redevelopment. So I still say that the administrative guidelines we have should sort of still be in the mix for what we say. Giving it a square footage, based on what Marty says and what I've heard, it does put you in a very interesting situation where you could have somebody do a major change to a building, have a drastic change to the facade, and still not come in front of us.
Right. We've had it happen, and we're not talking about like somebody buying us one, like Mr. Smith said, like a 20-foot building or 30-foot wide building, and they're going to paint the facade and maybe put a new awning up. That's not going to come before us. There's no reason for it.
Right.
But if they're going to be putting bigger windows in and, you know, changing materials, absolutely it needs to come before us.
So we seem pretty evenly divided on this. I don't think it's worth dying on a hill for either
No, I don't either.
way. I mean, the bigger issue and the bigger goal is to get this design review board in place and get these design guidelines going. So you guys know my personal opinion, where I think it should be. I think everyone's pretty much made themselves clear.
I have one more question.
Yes, Ms. Kempner.
Okay. All new construction and alterations to an existing building. That's all one grouping, right? It's not all new construction and alterations to an existing building as two separate things, right? A new building comes to us no matter what.
Yeah, 100%.
It says that right here.
Yeah, all new construction.
An expansion?
Above.
Expansion above
500
500 or the 10%.
Which we have to address. An expansion
10%.
above what percentage?
500 square feet or 10%, whatever's less.
I think that should come
Everyone
before
seems,
us.
yep,
yeah.
everyone seems to think
But
that that's
then when it comes
fair.
to just a facade change, like somebody buys a building, it really has just a front and a back facade. If they want to do something minor, like paint, awning, you know, maybe put new windows in, but keeping the size the same, that can be done administratively.
I mean,
So-
can we put stipulations in similar to what Clausen has on here?
Oh, what is Clausen?
I mean, I really like the way that Clausen had everything worded on here.
Clausen, you can basically
Oh, they were
replace,
very
and that's it.
specific.
That's about it, but you're cleaning up
That's a
your facade.
typical,
So-
historically,
They're not-
that's the typical administrative
Yes.
approval.
Question one, then. Everyone's, we're set, just to double check, we're set on the expansion 500, 10%.
I think so.
Yes.
Okay. So should, the larger question, I think, is, should buildings in the downtown design area be treated differently for facade renovations than the rest of the city? If they should not, if that's the general will of the commission, then we just change the ordinance to read, under administrative review, it would just read, expansions of no greater than 500 square feet or 10%, whichever is less, will be reviewed administratively, and we would move on and treat everything the same and review that under the administrative. Go ahead, Ms. Buckler.
No, I'm letting you finish, and then I'm just raising my
Okay.
hands.
So to move on from the general discussion on the design guidelines ordinance, if we just want to leave it as expansions, 500, 10%, then we can just take that alterations portion out of the administrative review and discuss the general guidelines for administrative review. So what's the consensus of the commission? Should buildings across the city be treated the same for facade alteration review? Mr. Trotto said yes.
I say yes.
I think so,
I say
too.
yes.
I'm willing to concede to that, although I'd like for it to be different because this is different. We have
And I'm-
guidelines that apply to that.
I am
So
in your
I see
spot.
it differently, but I'm willing to concede to this for the greater good because I think moving it forward is a good thing.
Yes, I'm exactly there too. Ms. Buckler?
I think it needs to be different, or the design guidelines and the design review board and all of that are kind of meaningless, or they're penned in. I think we need to take the leap of faith and let them be different. But the nice thing about the Planning Commission is if this is not working after some time, we can pass a new ordinance.
Yes, that's true.
City
I mean,
council.
well, we can recommend to City Council to pass a new ordinance, but we can certainly recommend and draw those reins back in. I have not been a super fan of this, but I'm coming around to this idea, and I see that it has narrowed. It is much more of a bowling alley than a wide open field that I think it was, and I think it's a leap of faith, and I believe in this mission, and I think it should be treated differently.
So I'd just like to note a couple things. We expressed a great deal of concern about creating more delays for developers by establishing a review board, and now we're talking about
Yeah.
additional delays, interposing additional delays. That doesn't seem consistent to me. Also, we are defeating part of the purpose of this process by sticking with, uniform review of all facade changes over a certain percentage. I mean, you can't get around that. We're just doing that. There may be overriding reasons to do that, but so I'd be comfortable. Chair's position and Ms. Buckler's position. I don't know how we vote on this or how we work this out, maybe by segmenting this part for a separate vote or something. But I'm telling you right now, I'm not going to, this is no deal breaker. I'm not going to vote against the whole thing just because my position doesn't prevail on this particular point. I just won't do it. So.
And I agree. I'm more interested in moving things forward at this point. We can always change it. I do think it should be treated differently, but I think it's more important to move things forward. So I think the next step would be if someone wants to make a motion. Go ahead, Mr. Patterson.
Would the motion include the 3,000 square feet then? That's what you would like to keep it as?
No, I think the motion would include, should the commission want to recommend approval, it would include a provision to change appeal to review, as pointed out by Mr. Richardson, to add a citizen, as requested by you, to the design review board. I think it would also include, let me get there.
38551.
Thank you. 138,551, you would take out alterations in the design. It would just address expansions. You wouldn't be dealing with alterations in 138,551 or 138,552. You would be just dealing with expansions. Does that make sense to everyone? Is that all the comments?
And we established new numbers for the expansion?
Yes, that too. Yep,
For
the
the
500
administrative
square feet or 10%, whichever is less, instead of the 750 square feet. Those are the items I think that would be included in a motion to recommend approval, should someone want to make that motion.
Doesn't that strip out the administrative review?
Yeah, so where are we with
It
administrative?
would allow administrative review for expansions of no greater than 500 square feet or 10% of the gross square footage, whichever is less.
So clarify, where are we with the facade then?
I think the majority of us are willing to concede that in order to move the ordinance forward, although we would do so with some reservations.
What is being conceded?
That alterations would be, facade alterations would be treated the same across the city. They would not be treated differently.
Okay.
You won that one, Marty.
I can make that motion.
One for today.
If I could just see your notes here.
I didn't have a lot of notes.
As she said, I make a motion to approve the ordinance amendment proposed for design overlay district to include section 138-551 under the members of the board, to include citizen as well, citizen representation, and
To change planning commission.
change
appeal.
planning commission appeal to review in the document, and to take out under section 138-552 administrative design review, have that read expansion of no greater than 500 square feet, 10% or 10% less to be reviewed administratively by the City of Berkeley Community Development Director and Berkeley DDA Director. Take it all.
I think so. Does anyone want to second the motion?
For unity's sake, I'll support the motion.
Okay. Any other comments or
So
discussion?
we're also changing section 548 in regards to the makeup of the board, right?
Yes,
I think Mr. Patterson, wanted
I may
a
have put it
citizen
under the wrong section,
representative.
but
Yeah, I think you said
Sorry.
551, it's 548.
Any other comments, discussion?
Love the flow chart.
Oh, the flow chart.
Well, we'll
It's,
change that around. That's required by the RRC.
The flow chart said appealing to city council on all of them if you're denied.
Well, only from planning commission. They can do that now, can't they?
But don't they appeal to ZBA? I mean, generally, a site plan, without it being a PUD or a special land use, when we
Goes
make a
to planning
decision, that's
commission.
the end. So if they wanted to
Planning
appeal, then they would go to ZBA.
Right, not city council.
So maybe check that, Vivian, with the ordinance
Okay.
requirements. Anything else? No?
It depends.
It depends on what we're denying them on,
Yeah.
doesn't it?
Right, so maybe,
Yeah, if it's a PUD, it goes to city council.
if you guys could go through and just make sure that it's correctly labeled.
I like that.
I think the sense is double check to make sure that
Yeah,
the
it's going
flow
to the right
chart is
place.
accurate with respect to what's appealed to which body.
We got plenty of flow charts to
Right.
help you out.
Okay, Mr. McLean, could you please call the roll on that?
Richardson,
Yes.
Shadle,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
Trotto,
Yes.
Buckler,
Yes.
Kempner,
No.
Murad,
Yes.
Patterson,
Yes.
Kaplanski.
Yes. Okay, so let's get into something much shorter than the administrative review portion of the ordinance amendments. I think the only thing to really talk about is that, number one, the facade alterations do not change the exposed surface material more than 50%.
I'd like to add to that, to any facade.
So
Any
the
exposed facade?
Any exposed facade.
the
that would-
facade alterations do not change the exposed surface material of any one side of the facade. that-
Any one exposed facade.
Okay.
yeah.
Not
So
any
if it's
one side,
So if it's a
any
building that only has
exposed
a front and a back facade,
Yes,
if the back's not changing and the front is changing 100%,
It's 50%.
that's 50%, so it would have gone to administrative review. I'm saying if it's just, if
Yes.
it's the front facade's changing 100%, it's got to come before us.
right, so how do you word that? Do not change the exposed,
I know.
I'm going to measure it out, so it's 49.1%. It does not round to 50%.
That's my job.
That's right.
Review some additions.
So it would be
how would you,
exposed surface material more than 50% on any one facade.
Okay.
Exposed facade.
yep,
Any one,
Exposed
Exposed.
Any
facade.
exposed facade.
not
Could-
any
could
one,
I-
any exposed
Any
facade.
exposed
go ahead,
facade.
Mr.
Exposed
Richardson.
surface material.
Or you're the lawyer. Come on, come up with the right wording.
I can't do that because it's too late at night right now. But
It is.
I had a different point. do we want to differentiate between facades that face the street or exposed to the street?
Or maybe we say the
Alley. I mean, do we really, if somebody's changing their alley, do we really need to review
No.
that?
I understand.
So I'm more, so maybe
They're
it's
doing.
the facades, the street, that's
And we're going right back to where we were.
Well, the street or
I-
facing a street, visible
If it's
from a
facing the
street.
parking lot,
What
right.
about those that are facing parking lots, though, a big parking
Right.
lot ones? You want
Oh,
those?
but you
Have
can
a whole
see
lot
those
of them
from the
that have
street.
front and back that face parking lots in the street, so
Yep.
that's where the exposed facades come from.
What about,
So can I interrupt for just a second, guys? I think I want to backtrack. I
Yeah.
think we might have missed something. Mr. McLean, we intend this to move forward tonight with a recommendation, correct?
yes.
So I want to open and close a public hearing on this one, too, because I don't,
On this too?
yep, I don't know that it was necessarily included in the first one. I just want to make sure we get all the comments that we need. So I'll open the public hearing, not for anything to do with the design guidelines, but just for this particular amendment having to do with administrative review. So it was the shorter one, 138-678 is the ordinance section. Is there anyone that wants to comment on this?
And 138-681.
Thank you.
There's two.
Yeah, I was hearing you guys kick around the whole, the way I understood Marty say it was 50% of the one side, and then I heard it later that it was 50% of both front and back.
No,
No, I think we mean one side.
one side.
So one side, if it's more than 50% of that one side.
The way it sits right now is if there was a front and a back, if the front was changing 100%, the back was changing not at all. It would be 50%, it would go to
And
administrative
if the
review.
front is changing 75%, it would still require it to come
It
together.
would, no, if the front, even if the front was, let's say the front was changing 50% or 75%, and the back was not changing at all, the way they calculated is that's only 37.5% change, it would be done administratively. What I'm saying, if any one facade is 50% or more, it has to come before us.
That's what I was thinking.
Yep, that's what we're intending. Anyone else?
That's what it is. Any one facade is changing more than 50%.
When you're talking about facing facades, how do you determine which facade is facing? Take the shoe repair shop. He's on a corner, so he's facing two directions.
Right.
So
But I'm saying
both
any
would be
one
facing
facade.
that.
They're
You
both
don't
facing.
choose.
Any exposed facade.
so any and all exposed facades.
Right.
Any one.
Yes.
The back alleyway.
Any,
If
yeah, any
anyone.
Even the
exposed
back
Any
alley.
any one or any
If
any of all?
any one of the exposed facades.
Any one of the three facades of the shoe shop was changing more than 50%, I think is what we're going towards.
Okay.
Anyone else?
And I'd like to note, this is a public hearing, so you do need to introduce yourself and state your name
Yeah.
and city of residence, please, because it is an official record.
And we should.
No.
And
we
there should be not dialogue
we should not
from
be
the
dialoguing.
commission, so.
Go ahead.
Annalise Petrus, I live on Franklin and Berkley. I do believe that for a PUD, if it changes, it kicks it to this section for administrative review.
So I'll address that when you're done talking, because we shouldn't be
Okay.
dialing, but go ahead.
Right. Well, I would just say that if it does, that PUD should be excluded from A and B. But as far as administrative review goes, I've heard many comments about the RRC, that administrative review is an endorsed best practice. Well, when I look at the RRC documentation, there's actually a checklist of best practices. Nowhere does it say to use administrative review. What its inherent reason to be an RRC is that you're to create a predictable and straightforward experience. So all it is about defining the experience. It is not about, more administrative reviews. I would challenge the DDA director to really find documentation of this, because but the PowerPoint is not what this is.
It's what they gave us.
Well, I'd like to see the terminology, because that was a conversation for at least 5 minutes. That is a complete mischaracterization of RRC.
Thank you. And to follow up on the PUD, any changes to a PUD, including changes to the elevations, would have to come back and go through the amended PUD process. Okay, then I will close the public hearing and go back to Planning Commission discussion. Ms. Buckler? Did you have something?
I
Sorry.
actually do. I want to follow up on one thing. I think administrative review creates part of a consistent and expected process or experience. I think if developers or business owners have a clear checklist of things that they know this is the path they're going to take, I think that's part of creating the experience. I don't think it needs to be spelled out in the RRC guidelines per se. It's been adopted as best practices by other communities that have done it. We all kind of take those, tweak them a little bit, keep improving the process. It's a fluid blueprint, the RRC guidelines, just like our master plan is a fluid blueprint. It's not carved in stone, nothing that we, the ordinances are tight and should be, but it is, I think it was even you who said, it is very difficult to craft ordinances that are so well written and address every potential situation that could arise. It just can't be done. We can't exhaustively catalog every possible consideration that goes through. We have to grow and learn and move from them, and it's difficult when you're up in the seat. You don't want to be so draconian that you make this tiny narrow lane that people can live in, because we're not a Stepford community. And so I think we're making some good strides here tonight. Not as many as maybe I would have liked, but we're just moving forward. So, okay, done.
Okay, does anyone have any additional discussion on that administrative review section 138-678?
Madam Chair, I just have a question. I'd be interested in the thought behind the if we're increasing the size of the windows, administration can review it. If we're decreasing the size of the windows, they can't review it?
I have a comment on that. I get where you're going with that, but I would also argue that we want a lot of windows, right? We want a transparent downtown. So if they're decreasing the windows, I do think they should
Still
come
has
to
to
us.
be above the threshold.
Right.
Yeah, there's an ordinance,
Yeah.
Yep.
like a percentage glazing, so.
Right.
Right. And if the windows are increasing, I
40
think
or
that's
something.
great.
That's a good thing.
Yeah.
I'm just interested in why.
I see at first glance, though, how that appears odd. Yeah.
I just have a comment about, like, what time period? So if I was a business owner and 6 months I got an approval to do 25% of one facade, and then a month later I get another 25%, like, is there a way that they can't do it over a year, it's 100%?
So-
Is that?
EPA has a rule against that in the environmental world, that like incrementally, and making these little tiny changes to avoid regulation. So there is precedence for that, and I think then, I think that's where we look to the good judgment of our city department. It says, a year ago or 2 years ago, you came in for a 10% change, and now you're coming in for a 25% change, but now we're in so he can throw it to us.
Okay.
I don't see anything in this that prevents, and also saying, like, you know what, I realize this falls within the predicted, or, what we've said should be an administrative change, but I don't feel comfortable with it, and there's enough controversy. I'm throwing it to Planning Commission. I think Tim has the ability to do that at any given time.
Yep.
And I suspect that the DDA and the advisory board and the development, community development director, as well as the city manager, will have the good sense to see when there's controversy or quite a bit of controversy and pull that forward. But you're right, you could have some nefarious people out there who are going to incrementally change to avoid
I
this.
wouldn't have brought that up. There's been about 40 years of litigation over what
Madam Chair.
constitutes a major change.
We can have that discussion all day long.
All right, anyone else?
Never do that.
Or if anyone wants to make, go ahead, Mr. McLean.
Just to kind of piggyback on Commissioner Buckler's comments, there actually is a facade that is coming back before the Planning Commission, most likely at our February meeting, the Folio building that was subject to the special use. They intend to submit plans before the deadline this Friday for the February agenda for their facade.
Okay. If there's no other comments, would anyone care to make a motion on this?
Could I just
Yes,
make
Mr.
sure that I'm clear about what's on the table here? It's 50% of any one exposed facade.
Correct.
And by exposed, we merely mean a wall which is not directly abutted by another wall.
Correct.
Okay, all right.
Very well put.
And the way this reads right now, it's saying it's for anything outside of the overlay district.
Well, no, it would,
We
since
both.
we changed the overlay district ordinance,
Okay.
it would now include the overlay
So
district.
then that administrative review of site plan review outside of the design overlay district shall be conducted by the building department in cases where.
So maybe that A goes away, I would assume then.
So
Administrative.
it has to be changed. It can't really go away.
Well, somebody talk through this here.
Administrative review for site plan review shall be conducted by the building department in cases where facade alterations do not change
Yes,
more than
there you go.
50% of one exposed surface
Okay.
material.
Yep, good catch, yep.
Just gotta straighten out a couple words.
Now if I can remember it to make a motion.
Got it.
All right.
Does anyone want to make a motion then?
I'll make a motion.
Go ahead, Mr. Murin.
I'll make a motion to, what we do, we're
Recommending.
recommending section 138-678, right? Administrative review. To include the, let's see. So A would have been, right?
Yep, just don't say the design overlay district.
Right. And then item 1 would read, the facade alterations do not change the exposed surface material more than 50% on any one exposed facade.
A second.
Okay,
Do you have a comment?
any other discussion?
I have a question.
Don't
How
need a
did we
second person.
how did we resolve the painting issue? Has that been,
It's not.
Surface material.
Surface
Surface
material.
material would imply,
is there now a formal definition of what surface material is?
I don't think there's necessarily a formal definition. I think we kind of just hashed that out here. We could ask that a formal
Well,
definition be included.
a
but-
painting is not changing the surface material. It's changing the surface color.
Do we need to memorialize that in the ordinance?
We can, and we
Sounds
could
like we need
include,
another definition.
or we could just put something here. Surface material does not include paint color.
It's our understanding, what about 10 years from now, and we're all,
Well, we could just add that. Surface material does not include
okay.
paint color.
I would offer that as a friendly amendment.
I don't know, did somebody second it?
I will second that as an amendment.
Okay.
And we have to remove B, right?
No, we would keep B, because that would include the portion that talks about the
Yes.
500 square foot expansion area.
Yeah.
Okay, any additional comments or discussion? Mr. McLean, could you please call the roll?
Shadle,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
Trotto,
Yes.
Buckler,
Yes.
Kempner,
Yes.
Murad,
Yes.
Patterson,
Yes.
Richardson,
Yes.
Kapelanski.
Yes. So the last ordinance amendment is Section 138-681, approval process. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we would need to change anything in there based on our discussion this evening. Is that correct?
I would agree.
Doesn't this kick us back to our basic site plan approval section? I think it's 138-680. I think that,
Well, no, because this adds in the review of the design overlay district.
Okay.
That it references 138 or 551. So I don't see any changes needed to this.
Does anyone want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve 138, 681 as,
To recommend approval.
or recommend
Yep.
approval.
I'll second.
Okay, motion and a second. Any additional comments? Mr. McLean?
Smith,
yes.
Trotto,
Yes.
Buckler,
Yes.
Kempner,
Yes.
Murad,
Yes.
Patterson,
Yes.
Richardson,
Yes.
Shadle,
Yes.
and Kaplansky.
Yes. Okay, so I assume those will go forward onto the next council meeting, is that correct?
That is correct.
What date is that?
I believe that's the 4th of February?
The 4th? Okay. All right, does anyone need a break before we go to master plan, or do you guys just want to keep going? Keep going? Okay. All right, so the last item on the agenda is the master plan scope. Mr. McLean, did you want to give us a brief overview?
Yes, at our December meeting, I believe it was Vice Chair Smith kind of gave everybody a homework assignment to review the 2007 master plan and kind of come back with some ideas for things you would like to see in the next plan. In my report, I laid out some of the statutory requirements, some of the items that need to be updated. We'll need to be mindful of things that the RRC recommends. And I also kind of included, my wish list, for the next master plan. And hopefully I speak for all of us in that a very robust community engagement portion of this, absolutely has to happen.
Okay, so you're just looking for our catalytic projects and also any feedback on the scope of work, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Who wants to start?
Well, I think the intent was we were going to get it started this month and come back in a month or two with our ideas.
Our projects?
Yeah, I don't think the intent, at least my intent, wasn't to assign homework as of December over the holidays.
You did say February, I believe. You said February, I believe.
I think I did say February.
Okay, so we can talk about those projects then in February, that's fine. But why don't we provide any comments anyone has on the scope of work? I thought it was quite thorough myself. Does anyone see any omissions, additions that need to be made?
Mr. Chair, I have just a few ideas maybe for consideration, and we're at a very preliminary stage, so we can take that into account. But I would like to make sure that the master plan covers a couple of different things, and some of these are alluded to in there already, but trends in transportation. Car ownership, the nature of cars, electric vehicles, ride sharing, and possibly self-driving vehicles are all on the horizon. I think that there's going to be dramatic impacts on communities from these developments in transportation. A forward-looking document ought to at least pose questions that are raised by these things. So it should be strong in the area of transportation, including multimodal transportation. Another thing, I think the master plan should try to look at economic trends. What is the trend in terms of uses of business property, uses of retail property in communities like ours? What can we look to what kind of business mix can we look to the future? You know, the potential uses include retail, dining, office and professional, and even light manufacturing. What is that mix actually going to look like? You know, I think the plan should delve into that. There's just a few more, a couple more specific things. Should we address home offices in the plan? That seems to be a very well-established trend, operating business from home. A topic that we kind of looked at and then dropped was Airbnb type facilities. Should they be allowed? If so, how should they be regulated? And should there be any particular areas of town that they're not allowed in, and so on. I don't know if we want to delve into like marijuana facilities or not. That seems to be going in a different direction right now, but it's something to think about.
Mm-hmm.
So those are just some ideas that I had that I think the plan should, when it's scoped, when a work plan is developed, it should cover these things as well as the other things.
Okay. Additional comments?
As far as the homework problem for, I guess it's February, does anybody have any questions what the intent of it is? And I can give you a little, you know, we've talked a lot about policy, but we really, the bottom line is it's the built environment. You know, it's what the landscape is, the built structures and things in town. So if you go wave your hand over Berkley or parts of Berkley and make something happen here, there, wherever, what would you want it to be? And these you know, look at the previous master plan if you can. I mean, we have issues right now, the community center, you know, we're talking about changing maybe Coolidge, we're talking about City Hall, multifamily. There's corridors we pretty much ignore for the most part. We're concerned now with our downtown, but there's 11 Mile, Woodward, and then there's that Greenfield that no one really ever has any ideas about. And there are areas in town that need redevelopment, maybe. And need isn't even the word, that you feel is an opportunity for redevelopment. Maybe it's residential, commercial, could be public, parks, whatever. You're waving your hand over Berkley. Pie in the sky ideas. Some can be very small scale. Some could be very large scale. It's just ideas. And it's a chance for us as a board, or a commission, I guess, to think about what we want our built environment to be like. And we all know 90% doesn't happen. But this is an opportunity to use your imagination. If you could put this here, what is it you would put here? Or move that, or adjust this, or whatever. So that's what it is. And it was actually interesting to see and this happened, it was January 2005 when we completed last year, so it's been a long time. So if anybody has any questions, but that is what I would like to charge everybody with, to really give it some thought. Even if it's take a map of Berkley and just scribble on it. That's the best way to do it.
I thought I was due tonight.
Go ahead, Ms. Kemper.
One of the things I would like to see, besides a way more user-friendly master plan that's like prettier and nicer looking, I would also love to see like a focus group or a survey or something where we start to get out and talk to our seniors. We've had a number of projects where it's talked about places for people to go. I think there's like this in-between age when your kids have gone out of the house, but before you like can solidify a spot in Oxford Towers where they feel like they're missing. I don't know what they're looking like. I don't know if townhouses or condos or apartments or what it is that they're looking for, but we've heard multiple comments about them wanting a space, somewhere to go after their house, but I don't think that we really know what they're looking for, and I think that that would be a good thing to know in moving forward to help guide and plan that.
Okay. What's the expected timeline for the to get started on the master plan, to get an RFP out? What are you envisioning, Tim?
Well, if we have an additional discussion in February, I think we could push out an RFP first part of March.
Great. Okay.
I've got a rough one started.
Okay. Does anyone else have any comments or additions to the scope of work? Mr. Murad?
Just a few things, because I'm looking at Tim's kind of wish list. Didn't we already complete Complete Streets a number of years ago? Okay. And then we did all the Woodward Avenue thing. We adopted some of their, like, I don't remember, we've looked at all that stuff. That stuff we should be able to find. And
Right, but again, you know, that's something looking on a regional or semi-regional thing.
Right.
And you know, it doesn't mean we can't draw from that. And
Right,
I
yeah,
would invite
exactly.
everybody to look at that, but you may have an idea of something that we could put here or
Right,
there.
right.
And that's what
Yeah.
we're looking
And
at.
then to tie into, too, to what Mr. Richardson said, you know, the future of automobile use is going to change over the next 10, 20, 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
We need to look at that, how that's going to change, you know. I mean, people are already starting to use like Uber and Lyft to go here and there. So ultimately, in the future, it might be that we're going to need less parking spaces than more.
Right, and more drop-off
And then-
areas.
Right, and more drop-off areas, and what happens to those parking lots in the future?
And that's
How
not,
do we utilize those?
that's not unique to us, so I'm sure there's
Yeah,
some concepts out
but
there.
it's something that we got to, you know, start considering. What's the future of that? So,
Okay.
and what Ms. Kempner said, too. Where do those
That was a
empty
good idea.
nesters go, you know?
So maybe a focus group or a charrette specifically designed at the empty nester
Right.
group.
Yep.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
And just to clarify, last year the city did adopt a complete streets ordinance, whereas in the past, I believe it was 2000, there was kind of a general, it was a resolution,
Yeah.
which didn't really have any teeth. So part of a complete streets ordinance is developing a complete streets plan, which it's recommended that that be addressed in a master plan.
Okay.
And we can draw on those documents that we already have. We certainly don't have to reinvent anything if we already
Right.
have it together.
Yeah, that's something I would assume the consultant would dig
Yeah.
all that up. And
Mhm.
So is everybody
What needs to
comfortable
be-
by February having
Yep.
some stuff, some ideas? And it's an informal conversation, so, okay.
Yep. Great. Anything else on the master plan? Oh, okay, I think we're all anxious to see that move forward, so great to see this getting rolling. Yes. Okay, so that's all the items on our regular agenda. Next up, did you have a
Sorry.
comment, Mr. Height?
Citizens' comments on this
Well, we don't have another opportunity for citizens' comments,
Well,
but go ahead.
that's an agenda item?
It was just a master plan discussion. It wasn't.
Well, I mean, I would just,
Go
I
ahead.
wanted to kind of at least weigh in real early on this. I mean, I understand on all the borders, on 12 Mile, Woodward, Coolidge, if you live abutting a business, there's always a chance that development might affect your home. I just hope that going into this next master plan, we look at all neighborhoods as being equal. If one neighborhood's not going to like something, the other neighborhood's not going to like it. And again, I live right off of business, so if there's development that's going to affect me, there might come along a time where it's going to affect me, but the inner neighborhood should be protected, because I feel that by protecting them, the values are only going to raise higher, because that's what people are looking for, is the neighborhoods that Berkley offers with the well-kept streets and the single-family homes. And if Oakwood Manor, or if St. John Woods, if it's not allowed there, they don't allow it there for a reason, because they're protecting their value, their investment. And I think going forward as a master plan, I think we want to make sure that all the areas are protected equal, that we don't want to have one side feeling like they're against another side. And again, like I said, if you live near a business, you got to expect that sometime there might be some kind of development that might affect you. But I'm talking about as you get further into the neighborhoods. I want to see that hopefully this master plan protects our single-family residential areas equally. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, liaison reports. Does anyone have anything to report?
Planning Commission, I was at the meeting last Wednesday night. They're just working on planning for the coming year.
Yeah.
Or
Which
a week ago Wednesday.
Not planning commission, though.
I mean, chamber, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, working on planning for the year, so.
Great. Anyone else?
Parks and Rec met, they were awarded a grant for a new splash pad at Oxford Merchant Park. 4 to 6 weeks it'll be finalized with the funding from the national parks, depending on the furlough. But that's going to be a major redevelopment there and very nice.
That was great, yeah.
Yeah, so they're excited about that.
Okay. All right. Should we go around? Do you have anything to add, Mr. Murad, for the group?
No.
Mr. Trotto?
I unfortunately missed both the DDA meetings that happened the last few weeks. Work has tied me up, and the 8:30 in the morning time is rather inconvenient, unfortunately. But I've made a few of them over the last few months. So I have to apologize to the DDA for not being able to attend.
Okay.
So that's all I have.
Ms. Shado?
Nothing.
Mr. Patterson? No. Mr. Richardson?
Nothing from environmental. We didn't meet in December.
Mr. Smith? Nothing?
Nothing to add.
Okay, I don't have anything else either, so any motion?
Actually, Madam Chair, one
Yes.
quick item. I'd sent out a poll regarding some proposed training
yeah.
from Carlisle Warman. I'll be getting another message out probably tomorrow. The consensus seemed to be that the March 7 date was going to work the best, so I will finalize that date and time with staff at Carlisle Warman, and I will get a message out to everybody. So I thank you for your participation in that. And the city manager also extended that training to city council as well.
That's great. Thank you for arranging that opportunity for us. It's a big help for them to come to us as opposed to us having to go to them. Okay. Any motions?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. I see it there.